10 years ago, Tom Murphy walks into Jason Spector's class and is going to do a presentation to 300 kids about, under the topic, bullying. How big of a problem is bullying for the country?
You know, we famously tell people, Jay, that there's no bullying problem in North America. And that's a little bit for shock value. It's a little intellectually confounding because everyone hears about bullying and that's the problem, that's the issue. But this thing has been around since the beginning of humanity. Has it changed? Has it morphed? Has it increased and decreased? Yeah, I'm sure it has. But that's not what we're at war with here. We're at war, and these are kind of Jason's words famously, when he sent me a clip of Caitlin Nicole Davis, who took her own life and live streamed it for the world to see a couple years ago. And when he sent me that clip, he said, you got to watch this. You know, a young person, a 12-year-old ending her own life and live streaming it for the world to see. I remember I was driving in my car with my daughter and he said, you got to watch this clip. And I said, I'll never watch that. And he said, we're at war. We're at war with this thing called hopelessness. And we have a generation of young people that are feeling more hopeless than they've ever felt in humanity, really. And so when someone says bullying to me, I very quickly backpedal a little bit and say, I don't think there's a bullying problem. I think there's a hopelessness problem, and there's this giant cauldron of hopelessness. And yeah, maybe one pinch of it is bullying. Maybe a large dose of it's bullying, but that's truly not the issue.
So how big is this hopelessness problem in the United States alone?
Oh, it's enormous. And just to kind of piggyback what Tom just said, I wouldn't want anyone that's watching this to think that we're trying to diminish the impact that a bullying situation can have on a family or on a child. But truthfully, to look at this issue, it's much larger than bullying, and it's that thing called hopelessness. And the infection and the contagion that exists around hopelessness is you know, it's at a level that I don't know how big of a dent we're going to be able to put in it. But we're trying our hardest, and we're putting young people on the front lines of this war, and we're empowering them with strategies and intention, and we're seeing success. But hopelessness is just, you know, one of the things that we haven't talked about is you have bullying, and then now there's cyberbullying, and that has certainly compounded the impact that bullying can have on young people. So it's really a complex issue, and it's not getting any smaller or easier to handle, but I really feel proud that our message and our work certainly is effective in addressing it.
Sure. So again, it started with bullying. It quickly migrated to hopelessness and empathy. If there's some parents out there that are watching right now, do you frequently get calls or comments from parents, my child's being bullied at school, what do I do? And do they understand the difference between bullying, a disagreement, and hopelessness?
Oh man, what a giant question. I think that's I don't want to say the majority of the communication we have with adults. I mean, certainly we have a tremendous amount of connection and communication with educators, but a lot of what we do is in the parent realm. And we talk to parents, and I think that's the place I always start with people, because I get moms all the time, and dads, but moms in particular, that call and say, my kid's being bullied. And I say, okay, well, let's have a discussion. You know, what's their name? Let's get that first name. And okay, Johnny. And what grade is Johnny in? And you know, sometimes I'll get first grade, kindergarten. And I would never dismiss a parent and say, it's not really bullying right out of the gate, because it's a mom that is protecting the most valuable thing that she has on earth. You know, how could I say that to a mom? But I start to frame it up and try and understand where the parent's coming from, their perspective, what they know, what they don't know. And then we run from there. So there's a lot of areas, but the first thing I always frame up, if it's a bullying discussion, is just trying to determine whether it's bullying or not.
How often are parents misinformed? Do they just quickly hit the bully button before it's actually something?
Yes, speaking of buttons, we have 5 buttons in our school-based presentations, and the first one is perspective. And that's really where people make their biggest mistake, is everyone's looking at this problem differently. And your perspective on bullying versus my perspective largely has to do with how we experience it in our own lives on a personal level. So, we quickly try and shift perspectives with large audiences and with groups of people and individuals that reach out to us. When you talk about parents inquiring or seeking information from us, a lot of the time they're very nervous that their son or daughter is going to find out that they asked us. And then we give them, some strategies and some suggestions and some ways to build some conscious awareness around this problem. But it often gets not specifically addressed because of this fear of their son or daughter not, being able to handle whatever it is that, we put out there for them. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is people want help, but they don't always take it once we give it to them. It's a very challenging family dynamic when your child is going through something like this, especially as they get older into the middle and the high school years. Some parents are terrified for their kids to know that they reached out to us. So, that's kind of a hurdle in and of itself on the perspective scale. But, it is very frequent that people reach out to us. What hurts, my feelings or breaks my heart is when we give them information, I can tell whether it's probably going to fall on deaf ears or maybe be put into action, and that's usually not the case.
It's, and I think a lot of it's some comfort on the parents' point of view or the parents' own perspective is to have a discussion, educate themselves. And for me, I always start with, what bullying is. And, just to throw it out there. And the game has changed, and I don't know if we'll get to talking a tremendous amount about the cyber game, because I always tell people and educators and parents that bullying has changed really for the first time in human history with this thing called cyberbullying. The game has changed. So when I give you this definition of bullying, I want you to think about, prior to the early 1990s. Bullying, by definition, is a bully is a blustering, quarrelsome, overbearing person who habitually, intentionally badgers smaller, weaker people. You get it all? 4 things in that definition. Number 1, it's got to be habitual. And these are the markers that I ask parents to pay attention to. Number 1, it has to be habitual. It has to happen over and over again. And that'll become very important as I move through this definition. But it has to be habitual. There's a lot of things that kids do that are mean and scary, which is number 2. There has to be an element of intimidation or fear associated with the behavior. We know 170,000 kids will skip school every day in North America because they're afraid. So I always tell educators, I tell parents that that's the signature of bullying, this thing called fear or intimidation. That's when you truly should pay attention, when your kids are scared, when they're intimidated. A lot of kids will come home upset because they didn't get what they wanted. That's, certainly not bullying. So it's fear, intimidation. It's happening repeatedly. Number 3, the person that's being targeted truly has to be smaller or weaker in some way. What does that mean? I tell educators, it means anything. It means your daughter's prettier than everyone else. And that always gets laughed at when I throw that one out there in front of audiences. And that was my perspective years ago until I watched 13 Reasons Why. That was Hannah Baker's issue. She was prettier than everyone else, and people used it against her. It doesn't really matter. There's some just giant targets like economics. Your dad's in prison, your mom's got a drug problem. There's giant targets, and then there's more subtle targets. But that perspective that a kid has on what makes them feel small or weaker really means anything, because that's how they feel. And then number 4, it's an intentional act. And I'm going to rewind here to this habitual. There's a lot of things that kids do that are mean and scary and hurtful because they feel like it. I always tell parents and educators, they are having problems at home, they're having problems with their friends, they're failing a class, they got cut from a team. And they come to school and do something mean or hurtful to someone. It doesn't mean they bullied a single person. It means that they probably operated how they're supposed to operate on their feelings, right? That's what kids do. That's the part of their brain that's fully functional. So I always tell, educators, especially because I'm in front of them all day, but as I talk to parents, I say, bullying truly is intentional to hurt people. Now that's the way it's been for thousands of years, habitually, over and over, intimidating or scaring, small or weaker, and it happens on purpose. So that's usually where I start, and I'll go into each one of those things as I have discussions with parents and educators.
And I think, Tom makes four really good, clear points there, black and white ways to identify whether something's bullying or not. But, to muddy the waters a little bit, not to confuse people, but one thing that jumps out are, I call certain behaviors bully behaviors. So someone can behave as a bully, but not necessarily classify as bullying. So is it bullying? Is it not? So a prank, a mean prank could be a bullying behavior, but it wasn't necessarily intentional for that person who received it. Additionally, my own self-image, even though that I'm a pretty large guy and appear to be pretty physically strong, I might not view myself that way. So if I walk into different environments feeling weak or smaller than or less popular or significant in the spaces I'm in, I could go home feeling hopeless because I didn't feel strong today, and then maybe I was on the receiving end of some negative energy. So I could certainly feel bullied, and I could maybe put out a good story to my mom or my dad that sounds like I'm getting targeted. But if it's a different kid throughout each space that I go into, and I have this sensitivity that's intense, and I'm carrying some anxiety and some depression and some other things, and now we're starting to tie into mental health. So that's where it can get really complicated when you have those four areas that you have to look to define whether it's bullying or not. But additionally, it gets complex too, and every situation is unique. So that's why we really feel strongly that it's not to focus on the bully. It's like, let's focus on creating more sweethearts and heroes, because we know that there's a high percentage of kids out there who could feel hopeless, whether it's bullying or not. So if we have carriers of hope, if we have people who take action when others won't, we're going to have less instances of hopelessness.
And let me be very clear. We're a bystander empowerment group, and that's our job, is to create sweethearts and heroes. And we're not there to fight bullying and to beat up these kids that are bullies. And I mean psychologically, I mean emotionally. This guy has got just a brilliant story when he changed his own perspective on this throwing kids out of class and publicly humiliating kids. And I don't think most teachers look at it as public humiliation. But what are you really doing? You're just helping to develop that young person into a monster. Someone that just is feeding on that negative behavior from educators and from parents when you're pointing out to a kid that they're bad and they're wrong. And I mean, years ago, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, he threw a kid out of class, and it's the last kid he's ever thrown out of class. And because that's not truly the problem. The problem for us that we've really identified that we try and bring to schools is that it's the rest of the kids. I mean, it's the rest of the kids that have the opportunity to jump into action, to become someone's hero, or to deliver hope to other people. Because this thing called bullying is never going away. And that's human behavior. And there's a lot of things that humans do that are really mean throughout human history. It's not going away. But truly the secret that we believe I don't want to say discovered, because people like Einstein and G.K. Chesterton, they discovered these things long before we ever did. We're just bringing the message into a school and activating young people to become sweethearts and heroes.